Welcome to the Three Things Podcast. I'm David Iglesias, Director of Wheaton Center for Faith, Politics, and Economics. You may be wondering why this podcast is called Three Things. You were probably taught by your parents, like I was, that it was impolite to talk to people about three things: religion, politics, and money. But what happens if your job is to talk about those three things? Well, let's find out. Our guest today is Evelyn Sanguinetti. Born in humble circumstances in Hialeah, Florida, to a Cuban refugee mother and an Ecuadorian immigrant father, she rose to become the first Latina lieutenant governor in American political history. A lover of the arts, she became an accomplished pianist and was accepted into the New World School of the Arts in Miami. She graduated from Florida International University and then the John Marshall Law School in Chicago. She worked as an assistant attorney general for the state of Illinois. Thereupon, she was hit with some major life obstacles. First, she was seriously injured in an accident which affected her ability to walk, and then she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. After overcoming this disability, she decided to go into public service, where she was elected to the Wheaton City Council. In 2013, after catching the attention of state and national party leaders, she was chosen to be lieutenant governor for the state and was elected to this position in 2014. She finished out her term in 2018 and is currently working on housing issues. She is a working mother of three. Welcome to Three Things Podcast, Evelyn.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I should tell you, I've been to Florida International University. I went to a commencement ceremony in 1995. I went with the then Secretary of Transportation. I helped write his speech. And the only thing I remember him saying is, "I'm the only thing between you and your degree, so I'll be really brief." And he was. Anyway, so let's start with a little bit of background. Sometimes you hear people say the American dream is over, but I think of people like you. Do you believe you've attained the dream?
Yeah, so I do believe that the American dream is still very much alive. It was alive for my parents when they came here as immigrants and refugees, and it was alive for me too. I still believe that it is, but it gets harder and harder to make ends meet. By way of example, my law degree was $100,000. I later keynoted the graduation ceremony 2 summers ago at the John Marshall Law School before they became a public institution. And I asked the kids what they're paying for the degree per capita. And they told me, "Professor, we're starting at about $200,000.
Oh my, I mean, that's a house.
Right? That's exactly. And starting at, I'm sure it goes much higher. But when you think about the American dream and the fact that my parents were able to work hard when they arrived here and persevere to be able to buy property and to be able to send their children to get the education that they couldn't avail themselves of. I feel really bad for our youth right now because it's very expensive.
Yeah, so looking back, what was instrumental in your amazing journey from the daughter of immigrants to becoming the first Latina elected lieutenant governor?
Well, what was instrumental was it takes the fire in the belly. I always wanted to persevere. Perhaps it's because I grew up in underserved neighborhoods growing up, and I grew up around underserved schools, under-resourced schools. So I always had that fire in my belly. But more so, I had a support system at home, and that support system was with my mother. Even though she never got a high school degree, she would always encourage me and tell me that in this country, everything is possible. And she'd also tell me things like, "Evelyn, en este país tú vas a subir como la espuma," which was, "Evelyn, in this country, you're going to rise like the foam." And she'd give me all these stories about access and opportunity, equity and fairness, and that hard work pays off. And were it not for her, I don't think I would have dreamed as big.
Wow. Now, was your family comprised of practicing Christians?
You know, that's a very interesting question, because you ask people that think they're Christian whether they're practicing Christians, and they'll probably tell you yes, right?
Sure.
And so growing up, I can't say that we prayed much as a family unless it was my uncle that was being detained in Cuba, for instance.
Mm.
Fidel would not let him out because he was still of military age. And we were trying to get him in through the Mariel boat lift. And boy, let me tell you, I've never prayed so many Padre Nuestros when we were hoping that he'd get back to us in one piece. But then, you know, it kind of
Yeah.
dies down. We weren't really church goers, but I always felt, and I always told people, that I was a person of great faith because I went to church a ton of times per week. But I was a church performer. I
Right.
got paid. I got paid to go to church.
Oh, really?
I got paid to sing the Ave Maria. So did I know the Lord back then? I thought I did, but I really did not come to know the Lord until many years later. So I know you have some follow-up questions on that, but I'm sure my family would have said they were practicing Christians, but it wasn't like that.
Yeah, so it sounds like you grew up in a kind of a cultural Christianity, which is actually pretty common regardless of where your parents are from.
Right.
That's pretty normal, actually. So you mentioned Madrilitos. Our listeners may not know the difference between the first wave of Cuban refugees around 1960 and then the Madrilitos, which was, as I recall, around 1980. Can you describe what that difference was?
Well, if you've ever watched Scarface, and let me tell you, it holds up to the test of time. So my mother came in the 60s, and she, late 60s, like 1968. I had already in the United States an aunt that lived in Puerto Rico. And so she requested my mom's side of the family to come in. So that way of coming in was in that fashion. And then there were also people that were exiles before my mom. That was another way of getting in. So we were not exiles. My family was not rich. They had nothing. Fidel took it all. And so thank God we had an aunt that sent a way for us. Then many years later, what Fidel Castro did was, and this occurred, would you say it occurred like in 1980?
Yeah, it was during the Carter administration, so 76 to 80, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. So what Fidel did was he let anybody out of the island that wanted to leave, but people that were in Fidel's eyes kind of worthless. For instance, he'd keep people like doctors and stuff like that he could still utilize on the island. But what Fidel did first, and I'll tell you this, okay, so all of them came in what we call the Mariel boat lift. And it was really interesting to see because I already had two uncles that became fishermen. They arrived in 1968. They were already young adults doing well for themselves as fishermen. And we always said, we're going to go back and we're going to go get Miguel because Fidel kept him. We're going to go get Miguel. And my two uncles sent two ships. They were in two ships. And Fidel filled our ships, but my uncle was not included therein. What Fidel did was open up his jails first and his hospitals. And those were the people that he sent to the States first through Miami, Florida. And so the second time around, my uncles went, and there was my uncle and his new wife. But you know, the communism did something to his head. I think communism does something to everybody, where he always held it against the family, probably also because the family left and he was the only one left behind. So it was something very sad. But you see, the people that came in through the Mariel boat lift, a lot of Cubans always say, "Oh, those aren't the real Cubans. It's the people that came in the 60s. They're the ones that came with nothing. And then if you came through the Mariel boat lift, you already had family in the United States to give you, some assistance." So, yeah, you always hear it from the seniors. Los de ayer son verdaderos, los de ahora son diferentes, and all that stuff.
So why did you choose the law as a profession? I mean, you could have been probably about anything, but so why the law?
Well, actually, it just happened. My whole thing in life has always been to keep an open mind to anything and everything. So after I was in Florida International University and I was completing my degree in piano performance, I went to my law lunchroom in Florida International University, and I saw that they had a lot of kiosks there. I inquired and they said, oh, well, we're accredited law schools going to accredited universities like yours to get law school students. And then right away I lost interest. I'm like, okay, well, welcome to our campus. I'm a musician, can't help you.
Right.
And I had actually gone to the kiosk of the John Marshall Law School. And she said, wait a second, you have no idea how good law school students do. I mean, how good musicians do in law school. And then
Really?
I was like, I see no correlation whatsoever. Please tell me, I'm curious. And then she says, well, right now, if you were to go to law school, you'd be spending about 6 to 8 hours a day in the law library. What do you do in the practice room here? Right? Practicing 6 to 8 hours a day. I'm like, okay, true. And then she said, and as you prepare your piano pieces for a concert to give the final performance before an audience, what do you think you do in front of a judge and jury? That's a performance too, and you have to prepare for that. So I remember picking up a booklet from the John Marshall Law School, and I thought to myself, you know, I've always been open to different experiences. I'm going to give this a shot. So I got to law school with a completely blank canvas. Did not know what a plaintiff was. Did not know what a defendant was. But again, it was that fire in my belly that I'm like, I'm already a musician. I'm accomplished here. So why don't we look for another opportunity? And
have you ever,
I do believe
have you ever gone back? Have you ever gone back and found that woman and say, you changed my life?
It's funny because now I'm actually, you know, John Marshall always has me return and talk to students and stuff. And they always joke about who was this advisor. Let's find her. I doubt they ever got a hold of her.
It was probably an angel, Evelyn, you know, who just disappeared after seeing you. Anyway, so I was an assistant attorney general, but for the state of New Mexico, a much smaller office in the state of Illinois. But I know that the offices are broken up into different divisions and whatnot. So can you describe what your duties were as an assistant attorney general?
Yeah, so they changed over the course of time. So as soon as I got out of law school, actually it was Judge Jesse Reyes, a Democrat, that recommended me to work as an assistant attorney general. Well, first as an intern and then as an assistant attorney general under Jim Ryan, not to be confused with George Ryan. Okay, Jim Ryan. So when I arrived, the first thing they did was put me representing. I wore a prosecutorial hat, and I brought cases under the Wage Payment and Collection Act and the minimum wage law, trying to get money for employees that were not paid, or either not paid appropriately or not paid at all by their employers. So I thought that was really neat to get started because I went from John Marshall being in a classroom environment. When you're an assistant attorney general, you're right there. You're like in the courtroom minute one, and it's trial by fire.
Yes.
And you're wearing the prosecutorial hat, so you have the burden of proof.
Right.
And it was just such a great experience that had I entered into the private sector, I would have been buried in the law library for years. So I went from taking cases through the Illinois Department of Labor and the victims. I went from doing that, I got a promotion to then handle cases in federal court. So I went from state court to federal court, and I was on the side of the defense. So it was very interesting too, because then when you're in the side of defense, you're punching holes into
Right.
the prosecution's case. So it was very neat to do that. I represented police officers and state actors for a few years until I started having more kids and we couldn't fit into our convertible studio in the city. So that was the end. I think I was an assistant attorney general for about 6-7 years.
Now, if I get this timing right, after your time as an assistant attorney general, you had a serious accident, and then you had a diagnosis of MS. Can you tell me what role your faith in Christ had in dealing with these two enormous obstacles?
Yeah. Well, the role was not a good role. Because I thought I had it all. I achieved my dream, which was to get a Juris Doctorate degree. I met my husband in law school. We got married in law school. So as I had more children, we sold our city convertible studio and we moved into a lovely house in Wheaton, Illinois. I started working at a Fortune 100 law firm. I had absolutely everything going for me. And then I had an accident. I was airborne on black ice. I fell on my head.
Oh my.
And I needed to go in for immediate surgery. And that's where I was told about having multiple sclerosis. At that time, my relationship with the Lord was non-existent because I was very angry. I was very angry as to why the Lord would do something like that to me.
Sure.
I was also angry because I was dealing with a disability that was scaring the living lights out of me.
Sure.
So it took a long time. I had a great friend that dated back to when I was an assistant attorney general that would tell me that I will thaw and I will let the Lord back in, and to stay open for that I would thaw. Those were the words that she would use. And it took a while. It took a few years that I was already living in my Wheaton home where I started feeling curious about my neighborhood churches. And it's a great place to be is Wheaton because
I'll say.
we have a church every street corner. So I think that's when I started to thaw and I started going to different churches. I identified as a Catholic. I was baptized Catholic. But then I went to college church because in Miami, when I went to church, people dressed up. It was like a respect thing, no shorts, no t-shirts, no chancletas. What do you guys call that in English? I don't know.
Flip-flops.
Flip-flops, yes. No chancletas, nothing like that. It was a respect. And so I started going to these churches and I started seeing different things, and that's not what I was accustomed to. And then I got into college church. And I saw that they had an organ. I saw that they had a choir, and I saw that people were dressed, giving the Lord the respect he deserves in his home. And I saw the pageantry that I remember seeing when I went to church in Miami as a paid performer. So I told my husband about the church, and he was very worried for me for a few years already, because I was mourning myself in my disability. And when he saw that I was curious, he said, let's start going. And a few months later, we all got baptized as a family.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Can you unpack a little bit how you were dealing with your disability? I mean, were you on crutches? Were you in a wheelchair? Or, how did you deal with it?
Yeah, so MS, once you've met one person with MS, you've only met one person with MS. The disease, it's a chronic disease, and it manifests itself in different ways with every person, okay? So in my case, when I got MS, they needed to also, I was told I had it, they found lesions in my brain, I got my first MS attack ever when they had to operate my neck because of the fall. That first MS attack did not allow me to walk. And then when I started being able to walk a little bit, I couldn't walk more than a city block. And it is because of the fatigue
Sure.
associated with the disease. Once you're having an attack, the fatigue gets you. Even though your mind is telling you you could go, the fatigue would not let you go. It was very frustrating, but that's how it manifested itself with me. I still have a limp because of it. I still drag my left leg, but that doesn't prevent me from being in heels and fighting the disease at every turn. I face the disease now with exercise, with good diet, and I went into drug therapy right away. But sometimes you'll meet people with MS in a wheelchair.
Right.
And some people have reoccurring MS, which is what I have, but other people have progressive MS, and that's far worse. So again, it's very different in every person.
What advice would you give Wheaton students who are considering a career in public service?
It's funny that you should say public service, because when I became lieutenant governor, I became more interesting as an alumni. Before I used to be an adjunct professor as well as working in my full-time job at John Marshall. And then when I became lieutenant governor, then all the kids wanted to start talking to me. And they said to me, Professor Pacino, I always went by my maiden name, tell me what I have to do exactly what you did and become lieutenant governor. And my question to my students was always, well, how have you served? See, you can't be an elected official and you can't be a leader until you've humbled yourself and put yourself in a position of helping those that will probably never be in a position to help you.
Amen.
And I think I learned how to be a leader, not an elected official, but a public servant and a leader when I was at the John Marshall Law School Fair Housing Legal Clinic. And I found out that people were denied housing on the basis of their protected class. And I didn't think that happened in today's age. And that's why I got involved. And hearing the stories of those individuals that went through that pain of not being able to live their American dream because of the color of their skin or their ethnicity, that's where I learned how to be a public servant and later a leader. So that's what I have to tell students these days is, what have you done to help your fellow man? And you could do it not by being an elected official. You could get involved in your PTA. You could get involved in your library board. You could work the food pantry. So many ways, but humbling yourself and putting yourself in a position to help those that can't help you. That's my advice.
Yeah, so I had a student who's a Navy intelligence officer now, but his first job out of Wheaton was doing landscaping. He did it for a summer. He was waiting on his background investigation. And he had no bad attitude about it. He worked hard. I think he said he was the only native-born American on the crew. And I said, let me tell you something. You should be really proud of yourself, because a lot of your contemporaries would not want to do that for a summer. They would think it's beneath them. I said, there is no job beneath you. And I mean, I took a year off making wooden tabletops between college and law school. So I know what it's like to get my hands dirty, and I've got a lot of respect for people who do that.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your call. Did you ever feel called to work in public service? Do you believe God calls people to go into public service, for example?
Well, seeing the way things worked out with me, I do believe that the Lord has a very interesting way of guiding you and leading you. And the way I came to the Lord, as I told you later on in life, was very interesting, because I came to him with a prelude of great pain. And then all of a sudden I get this ability to go from serving in the city, because I just wanted to help my neighbors and protect our sidewalks and create great infrastructure, and going from representing my residents to going statewide. It was, I mean, many people would say it's a political fairy tale, but I think it's the Lord guiding me.
Mhm.
And I take that guidance with great humility. And so the minute that I was sworn in as lieutenant governor, I felt like a great responsibility because I was the first Latina in the country.
Right.
And I felt a great responsibility to serve everyone, you know, in very little time. I only had 4 years. So I believe that that the guidance was not luck. The guidance was the Lord guiding me. And I feel it's very interesting the way he's done it, in a very beautiful thing, and sometimes a very bad joke too. But I think it's been all him.
Absolutely. And your comment about the Lord using pain before leadership, that rings true biblically. I mean, you think about Joseph, who was jailed for a crime he didn't commit, Moses, who escaped punishment for after killing someone, and he was in the wilderness for 40 years. You think about Jesus obviously suffered terribly, you know, before he was crucified. So your comment about pain preceding leadership really resonates. It's really true. But I think people, they want all the goodies without having to pay the price. And what I'm hearing you say is, in your experience, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. But you know what? Had the Lord come and visited me and said, listen, could you still be a leader absent this chronic disabling condition? I'd probably say, you know what? Sure. No, but just joking. I think that it just happened that way. And I'm glad he chose me as his vessel.
Now, was it hard leaving public service in the way you did?
Oh yeah. So it's no secret here. The person who asked me to run with him is Bruce Rauner.
Right.
He's a person of great wealth. I was not. And I think that's one of the reasons why he chose me, because I came from humble beginnings, and I never made any secret of being pro-life. My mother was 15 when she chose to have me and keep me.
Wow.
As a Cuban refugee. She chose me. So he knew about me because he had a team that did a lot of vetting. And he knew what he was doing when he chose me. I'm glad he chose me and gave me the opportunity. But after a term, the state did not want us back. We did not win a second term. I was very careful because people look at how you win, and it feels so good to win. I've won before. I've won twice, right? Statewide and council-wide. But people look closer at how you lose.
Yes.
Closer at how you deal with it. And because I knew that, I prayed on it a lot, because I needed to open my heart and my mind because I was hurt. Any loss is hurtful, right? And as soon as I was able to do that, it didn't take long, because I didn't have long, right? And I asked to speak to now Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton. And she took my call. I congratulated her on her victory.
Nice.
And then I told her, let's work together to make this transition as seamless as possible for the people.
Right.
And there was a huge silence on the other side, because that does not happen often.
Right.
So when you ask whether it hurt, I think it still hurts today.
Sure.
I would love to I miss my farmers the most, my rural communities the most, because that's where I saw the most need. But remember, you don't have to be an elected official to lead. Now I'm the executive director of the Hope Fair Housing Center. I go right back to my roots, and I fight discrimination and segregation in housing.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the term redlining actually comes from the city of Chicago, because that was the practice until the 60s or 70s, in which areas were kept away from typically African Americans, but maybe other groups were included in the, we don't want that group here.
Right. Right, right. But you still see it today. When I talk to individuals about fair housing, they're like, "Oh, well, it's the 21st century." Clearly, no one's told that they won't sell to them because they're Black or Hispanic.
Right.
I'm like, well, yeah, you probably won't see that these days, but the wrongdoers find other ways in which to continue their practices.
Sure.
It could be algorithmic bias. It could be in many other forms.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's still as needed today as it was back in 1968.
Wow. Do you have any suggested books or scripture verses that you would like to recommend to listeners? Things that have made a difference in your life?
Well, you'd be surprised at the one that I would recommend.
Okay.
Because I'm part of Manny Mill's ministry and he was part of my growth process.
Mm-hmm.
So Manny Mill was somebody from my church who would oftentimes tell me that as a leader, I needed to look out for those in prison.
Mm.
And I was curious. And so I started going to his ministry. And I needed to pray alongside people that had already served their time and were having a hard time getting back into the free world. And at the beginning, I was very prosecutorial minded, and I thought, it's kind of a cross you have to bear forever. And he taught me to open up my heart and to say, you are no different than the prisoner in a jail cell. And you need to treat them as you would treat yourself. We are in the same body.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So what verse in the scripture talks about that?
Well, obviously, and there's a great description of many parts to the church. Some are hands, some are arms, some are legs. Right. Yeah, you bet. And I wish I could give you what the reference was, but it escapes me right now.
Well, we know which one it is, the treatment of prisoners. And I always hear that verse, but the thing is how I've had such a change of heart from the way I thought about prisoners to what I think now.
Oh, wonderful.
And we went to a lot of jails and we prayed alongside a lot of people serving time. And that was another evolution. I'll
say. So I have one non-serious question for you, or maybe it's serious in a different way. It's not a public service question. So I'm curious because I love music. I listen to it all the time. I think I have 40 different Pandora stations, and that is not an endorsement for Pandora, but just saying. What is your favorite piece of music for a piano player and why?
Oh my gosh. Okay, I think you're a great guy, but I hate that question. So this is why. So when I was accepted into a school of the arts, where I got to learn about Mozart and I got to learn about Bach, and all the masters. In my growing phase, I don't know how many favorites I had. So at the beginning, it was, I gotta say, I have one favorite era. At least I could tell you that much.
Fair enough.
Which was the Romantic era. Uh-huh. So when I started getting better at my skills, I loved Chopin.
Chopin, yeah.
I loved him. But then as I started getting older, I was like, oh, barf. No, he wore his heart on his sleeve. It's just too stupid. Like, who does that? And so I came to love Brahms and his intimacy. And he did not wear his heart on his sleeve. He was more complicated. Mm-hmm. So if Romantic era is my favorite, and Brahms is my favorite composer. One piece, you just can't do that to a person. I would say I love all of his intermezzos.
Okay. What do you think about something a little more simple like For Elise by Beethoven?
No, never.
No, okay. Fair enough. I hate to draw this to an end because this has been a great conversation, but I try to keep this into a manageable size interview. Let me ask you this. Is there anything I should have asked you but did not ask you?
You should have asked. Well, I could tell you what everybody asks me.
Okay. Please.
Why are you a Republican when Republicans don't care for people?
Oh, that's a nasty question.
I get
Yeah.
that a lot. I get that a lot. And I get that a lot in the area that I'm in now.
Mm-hmm.
And I remind them that housing is a human right that should never be politicized.
You should also remind them that it was the Nixon administration that put forward the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and created the EPA.
Interestingly, it was also Bush Sr. That is responsible for the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Oh, that's right. Bob Dole. Dole.
Yeah. It was also a member of the Romney family that was in the Civil Rights March. It was also Ronald Reagan that signed off on MLK Day.
That's right.
So just keep an open mind.
Yeah. No, yeah. And because I would never ask that question because I don't make that assumption for obvious reasons.
I get that a lot.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Well, it was campaign crazy season around here recently.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, that's true. So just mentioning Chopin, I need to tell you, I took a study group to Warsaw, and as you know, Chopin was Polish. And there's a beautiful park in Warsaw, and there's a beautiful statue of Chopin. It's very stately, and he's considered a hero there. But, and you'll love this, there's also a Ronald Reagan Street and a beautiful statue of Ronald Reagan. Because he called it when he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And no American president had the gumption to call the Soviet Union the evil empire. And he was roundly criticized for it. But looking back now, after 40 plus years, he was right. Anyway, Madam Lieutenant Governor, thank you for your time. Blessings on you, your husband, and your family.
Thank you, and blessings on you. Hasta la próxima. Till next time.
Hasta la próxima. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to Wheaton's Center for Faith, Politics, and Economics podcast. 3 Things with host David Iglesias. Join us again in 2 weeks for a new interview with an accomplished faith, political, and business leader.